What's up everybody on YouTube, AJ Rest back to discuss another video, and today we're going to be talking about the biggest takeaways from NFL Week 4. Week 4, we're already in October, guys. The season is starting to move a little bit, and there were a lot of intriguing games. We have to talk about Jaden Daniels, who was for sure an early favorite for Offensive Rookie of the Year. How he played in that Cincinnati Bengals game and then dominating the Arizona Cardinals in Week 4. That Washington Commanders team is looking good, and also right now being #1 in the NFC East. That's a conversation right there to talk about. The Minnesota Vikings are still undefeated, moved on to a 4-0 record. If they continue to play like this, they'll for sure be mentioned as a Super Bowl contender and favorites in the NFC, because how Brian Flores has that defense playing, how Kevin O'Connell has a great rapport with Sam Darnold, how he's playing, potentially comeback player of the year, and the return of Jordan Addison, and still having Justin Jefferson, Aaron Jones, and a lot of different offensive weapons like that. That's a conversation to be had about the Vikings, and we have to start taking them really serious because they're continuing to show that they are an improved team and they're not playing around. Also have to talk about teams like the Jaguars, who are 0-4 now, still winless, and it's really baffling to me in my opinion, because I think Doug Peterson is a good coach. Trevor Lawrence still has potential, but at times he just gets in his way and sometimes overthrows his receivers and misses reads and things of that nature. So it's a conversation there, because they almost beat the Texans, but almost isn't good enough. Then the Cincinnati Bengals getting their first win over the Carolina Panthers, they needed that for sure, because if they would have lost, that would have been a crazy conversation going 0-4. So can't afford that. There's a lot of good conversations to talk about. Also the Philadelphia Eagles, who lost in a dominant fashion against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, also were dominated by them in the playoffs last year too. So Eagles, I mean, we know that they're dealing with some injuries right now too, but it's an effort thing too with them. So it's a lot of conversation with there. I know Eagles fans are probably uneasy about Nick Sirianni and just how the things are going there, but like I said, it's Week 4. It's still early for sure, but there's a lot of intriguing conversations to talk about, and we're about to get into every single game. So with that being said, guys, before I get fully into NFL Week 4, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. You know we post about here videos about sports, lifestyle, pop culture, NBA, NFL, Marvel, DC, cooking videos, shorts, reels, things of that nature. With that being said, let's talk about NFL Week 4. Of course, we have to start out with the first game that took place for NFL Week 4, Thursday Night Football, between the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Giants. And the Cowboys were able to win 20-15. Like y'all do know, I am a Cowboys fan, but I'm also a realness. I'm not delusional, so I'm just gonna let you know how it is, objectively and subjectively, but mostly objectively. And they needed to win this game for sure. That goes without saying. But in the fashion that they won, it definitely wasn't satisfying as a Cowboy fan or just in general watching football. Also, these Thursday night games, they just are stinkers sometimes. But I will say about the Giants real quick before I dive deeper into the Cowboys. The Giants, they didn't play a bad game. Now, obviously, they can't run the ball. Devin Singletary isn't a bad back, but it just seems like whenever the Giants try to run the ball, their offensive line just doesn't know how to protect adequately. We saw that because the Giants only rushed for 26 yards total in the game, so that's pretty horrid. But Daniel Jones, he didn't play bad. They just weren't able to get in the end zone. He completed 29 out of his 40 passing attempts, had 281 passing yards, and of course that interception at the end. But Malik Neighbors, he is a guy for sure. Now, he got hurt with a concussion in that game at the end, so praying that he's able to be okay. If he has to miss any time, hopefully it isn't too much time. He wrecked the game for sure, had 12 receptions for 115 receiving yards. He broke Andrew Booth Jr. at the beginning of the game. I mean, that was a disgusting route, but yeah. And then also Wan'Dale Robinson had 71 receiving yards on 11 receptions. So the Giants, they didn't look bad, but obviously we know that they're inept of talent overall, and they still found a way to lose the game. So really don't expect anything from them this season anyways, but it just sucked that Malik Neighbors got hurt, and hopefully he's able to be okay soon. We're talking about the Dallas Cowboys for them because, I mean, obviously they control a lot of conversation around the NFL in general. Like I said, it wasn't a great win, and it sucks because DeMarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons, they're both going to miss time now. That freaking MetLife turf, man, SMH. But beyond that, we're going to see what the Cowboys are made of for sure. They have to play against the Pittsburgh Steelers in Week 4, and then they're going to have games against the Lions, the Falcons, eventually the 49ers. Of course, they have a bye week, and this isn't in order. I'm just listing some of the teams I remember them playing. See what the Cowboys are made of for sure, because it's not going to be an easy stretch, because in my opinion, they look like an average football team with a few individuals who are great, of course, being Dak Prescott in the regular season at least, and CeeDee Lamb. We know the type of talent that he is. Talking about Dak, completed 22 out of his 27 passing attempts, had 221 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. Also, Rico Dowdle had 46 rushing yards, 11 carries, a receiving touchdown. And then CeeDee Lamb, he had that huge 55-yard reception for a touchdown. Overall, had 7 receptions for 98 receiving yards. Also had a few rushing attempts, so that was pretty interesting to see. But like I said about this Cowboys team, we're going to see what they're made of, because every single team that they play against, they're going to test that run defense for sure. So they're going to have to beef up, be physical, be strong, and we'll see what happens, because as a Cowboys fan, I'm not optimistic. In my 22 years of life, I haven't seen them win anything significant anyways, but we all know that they are a solid football team, but ultimately it's for them to put it together. I mentioned this game a little bit in the intro, talking about the Cincinnati Bengals and the Carolina Panthers, and the Bengals finally got their first win over the Panthers, winning 34-24. Just a really good overall performance, I would say. Joe Burrow had a good game, completed 22 out of his 31 passing attempts, 232 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, only 1 interception. Jamar Chase had a really good game, only 3 receptions, but for 85 receiving yards and a touchdown. And also T. Higgins had 6 receptions for 60 yards. Chase Brown on the running game had a really good game, 15 carries for 80 90 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, and Zach Moss with 51 rushing yards. So the team, they played a pretty overall sound football game, I would say. Definitely keeping their playoff hopes and just overall contending hopes alive, because if they would have went to 0-4, it would have been a catastrophe for sure, especially losing to the Panthers, who, while they look good under Andy Dalton against the Raiders, we still don't expect anything significant at all from them. So that's good news if you're a Bengals fan. And for the Panthers, like I said, don't really expect too much from y'all. Andy Dalton has looked really good as a backup though, proven to be one of the best backups in the league, him and Joe Flacco. We'll talk about the Colts in a few because Joe Flacco also played on Sunday, but it's going to be interesting to see what the Panthers do going forward. Obviously, it looks like that Andy Dalton is going to start for the remainder of the year. I don't know what their plan necessarily will be with Bryce Young, but there's been some mumblings about them potentially trading Deontay Johnson, who's on the final year of his contract for the Panthers, and he had a really good game against the Bengals, having 7 receptions for 83 receiving yards and a touchdown. It would be interesting if a team like Kansas City would contact Carolina about trying to acquire him, because we saw that Rashee Rice got hurt. So only time will tell with that. But this game, it was a really good win for the Bengals. A lot of people were talking about their defense. People like Chris Canty blaming Joe Burrow in that Commanders loss, even though Joe Burrow had a phenomenal game and it was a defense that clearly was lacking in that game. But yeah, the Bengals, they needed this win and they came through for sure. This game right here was a divisional matchup in the NFC South between the New Orleans Saints and the Atlanta Falcons, and the Falcons were able to win this game 26-24. Credits to Younghoe Koo, who essentially made a game-winning field goal. And bro, look at this clip. Oh my gosh, it's so funny.
What's up, my nigga? What did you just say? What's up, my nigga?
It's a classic for sure, but that's essentially what Younghoe Koo is on. He's been able to be with the Falcons for a while through 3 different coaching staffs. So when you have a good kicker, that's always a good thing. But talking about the game, I'm not going to be too harsh on the Saints because it was a really good game and they're dealing with some injuries defensively and a little offensively. The Honey Badger himself, Tyrann Mathieu, was already dealing with a lingering heel issue, but also is dealing now with a growing injury. So we can expect him to probably miss some time. That sucks for the Saints defense and the Saints overall. And then Taysom Hill was also dealing with injury too. So that'll be an intriguing conversation. For every NFL team, there's going to be some adversity, whether it's injuries or just in general throughout the season. So we'll see how the Saints respond, because they looked very dominant in their first 2 games and also didn't play bad in the Eagles game either too. So I still think that they're capable of being a playoff caliber team. Derek Carr, he didn't throw for a touchdown in this game, but he didn't have bad stats either. He completed 28 out of his 36 passing attempts, had 239 passing yards and an interception. Alvin Kamara had 77 rushing yards on 19 carries for a touchdown. I did mention Taysom Hill got hurt, but he also had 2 touchdowns as well. Only 24 rushing yards, but having that short game for them is huge in his role. And then Chris Olave, 8 receptions for 87 receiving yards, a dog. Rashid Shaheed also had 8 receptions for 83 receiving yards. I'm telling you, the Saints, they do have a really good team, guys, but the Falcons, they prevailed after losing in week 3 to the Kansas City Chiefs, where they had a chance to win the game. It was a good response win for them. Kirk Cousins completed 21 out of his 35 passing attempts, had 238 passing yards and interception. Didn't throw for any touchdowns, but their team was able to lock in defensively and play a solid game and get the win. And for both of these teams, the biggest takeaways are that they are for sure playoff contenders. And as the season goes on, we'll see if the Saints or the Falcons are able to win the division, or the Buccaneers too, who we'll talk about in a few, because they've won a division the past few years and in my opinion should be favorites to win it again this year. I mentioned the Jacksonville Jaguars in the intro as well, and we can talk about them even more right now in this game, because they lost a game when they were ahead to the Houston Texans, losing 24-20. It came down to the end ultimately. When I was watching the game, I thought that they were going to force the Texans to a field goal that had the game going to overtime, but CJ Stroud found Ngumbuale for that last touchdown, so that was able to end the game essentially. And man, if you're a Jaguars fan, I am sorry. 0-4, no one really expected this. I believe Trevor Lawrence has lost his last 10 starts. If it's not 10, it's 8. That's insane, because we saw the precipitous fall off that they had in the 2023 season because of the injuries. Also, Trevor Lawrence wasn't 100%, but now he just got this contract. Team is riding high. They were expecting to elevate and they still don't have a win. That's not good. It's definitely some panic that should be going on. I believe Doug Peterson called plays in the 2022 season. People are asking him constantly if he's going to return to that role of calling plays. I think they should, because why wouldn't you want to recreate some of that success you had in the 2022 season when you made a divisional round in the playoffs? Now it's not looking great. Trevor Lawrence completed 18 out of his 33 passing attempts for 169 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. I will say in the running game from Tank Bigsby, he played really good. It had 7 carries for 90 rushing yards. Travis Etienne Jr., he didn't have the best game, only rushing for 50 yards, but I know that he was a little hobbled as well too. So there was some slack from that. But their rookie, Brian Thomas Jr., in my opinion, he's certainly been their biggest positive on the team so far this season. He had 6 receptions for 86 receiving yards and a touchdown. Christian Kirk also had 7 receptions for 61 receiving yards and a touchdown too. So it's not like the team doesn't have talent. Defensively, they have some good players too, like Hines Allen and him among others, but it's for the team to lock in and get things together, because if they continue to play like this, they might as well tank. But for the Houston Texans, they play without Tank Dell, but we know that they have an abundance of talent offensively and defensively, and they showcased that throughout the game. They were down 7-0 after that punt return was dropped, but they still were able to come back and prevailed as they are the better team. CJ Stroud, he had a solid game. I would say he completed 27 out of his 40 passing attempts, had 345 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. They were still without Joe Mixon in this game, so the running game wasn't as prominent as we expected to be when he returns. Cam Akers had 13 carries for 53 rushing yards. JJ Taylor only had 6 carries for 18 rushing yards, but their receiving game is crazy. Nico Collins, I think it's time to say that he's a top 10 receiver in the league right now, and that's not a crazy take at all. We saw the type of season he had last year, really a breakout year, and he's continuing to stand on that, leading the league in receiving yards right now. Had 12 receptions for 151 receiving yards and a touchdown. It's just like he's always open. You know where CJ's getting the ball to, and he also has Stephon Diggs, who had a rushing touchdown on Sunday against the Jaguars and had 69 receiving yards on 5 receptions. I talked about Ngubwale having that game-winning touchdown. He also had 47 receiving yards and a touchdown as well. So I'm telling you, the Texans, they didn't even have their best game. They're still continuing to deal with a lot of penalties. Tunsil, you're one of the best left tackles in the league, but oh my gosh, it's crazy how many penalties that offensive line gets, and him in particular. So you expect more discipline out the team, because if that continues to be a problem, that's going to cost them in the playoffs and a season in general. So they need to get that under control for sure. But we know that D'Amico Ryans is a great coach. Bobby Slowick is a great OC. CJ Stroud is one of the best quarterbacks in the game and only in his second year. So they definitely have a lot to take from this. They didn't play a great game at all, but still find a way to win. It's a good sign for them. For the Jaguars, y'all better lock in, man, because the season is slowly slipping away. Not gonna lie to y'all, we're not gonna focus on this game too long because it was an absolute stinker. Denver Broncos beat the New York Jets, winning 10-9. That's gross. And there's a lot of things to talk about, but like I said, we're not gonna spend too much time on this game. But I will say the Jets still found a way to lose a game after holding Bo Nix to -7 passing yards at halftime. And Bo Nix only had 60 total passing yards too, and he had a touchdown too as well. But 60? Are you serious? Is this Little League? That's bad. He completed 12 out of his 25 attempts too. Yeah, that was bad. The Jets defense played great, but their offense wasn't able to get anything going either. We can go on and talk about that right now. There's no reason for me to talk about Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin. No offense to y'all guys. And Cortland Sutton, who the touchdown was to from the Broncos. I'm not going to get into that. Let's be real. But for the Jets, I mean, it's the biggest story because we expected this to be a dominant win for them, and they absolutely did not show up at all. You can talk about the Zerline field goal that was missed that would ultimately win them the game. Yeah, that's a huge story, but even beyond that, if they would have won the game still winning 12-10, we still would have been talking about how bad the offense looked because it wasn't great. Now, stats-wise, Aaron Rodgers didn't play bad. I mean, he completed 24 out of his 42 passing attempts, had 225 passing yards, 0 tuds, 0 interceptions. I mean, they only scored 9 points, so that's 3 field goals, obviously. But just a team, they were not clicking at all. The run game wasn't there. It really seems like there's a disconnect as well from Aaron Rodgers and Robert Saleh. We've been speculating about that since the offseason when Aaron Rodgers had that Egypt trip, and then that awkward hug against the Patriots, and then now Robert Saleh saying that there might need to be a change in the cadence. You don't want to change the cadence. That's how Aaron Rodgers has thrived, drawing defensive offsides to create free play that end up becoming explosive plays, so things like that. But yeah, I'm not really surprised though. I don't think the Jets are gonna even win their division anyways, and they should be contenders for a wild card in the AFC, but I never really looked beyond that anyways. So I'm not surprised by this game, but it was a stinker though. In this game between the Minnesota Vikings and the Green Bay Packers, we saw the return of Jordan Love, and while the Green Bay Packers did only lose by 2 points as they had a way better second half than they did in the first half, we saw that the Vikings, they are real and they're like that in my opinion. They were up 28-0 at one point in the game, and you can say they almost blew that lead for sure. But in a nutshell, and really throughout these first 4 games of the season, no one expected the Vikings to be playing at this level anyways. So for me, it's just really a testament to Sam Darnold, to Kevin O'Connor, Brian Flores, and just overall the Vikings organization, how they've been playing so far. We'll talk about the Vikings real quick before we get into the return of Jordan Love, but they just look great right now. Sam Darnold completed 20 out of his 28 passing attempts, 275 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and only 1 interception. Playing really efficient football, and he's continuing to be the favorite for comeback player of the year. Hopefully he can stay healthy, and if the team continues to play at this level, he'll certainly easily win that award. Aaron Jones had 22 carries for 93 rushing yards, playing against his former team. He also had 46 receiving yards too. Then we saw the return of Jordan Addison. He had a receiving touchdown and a rushing touchdown. Did great for me on fantasy. Shout out to Jordan for sure returning. Yes, sir. And Justin Jefferson had 6 receptions for 85 receiving yards and a touchdown. We know that he's, in my opinion, the best receiver in the game, so I'm not surprised by that. I know he's happy with how the team is playing, and after seeing that receiver series on Netflix this past summer, I'm excited for Justin Jefferson, and happy for him that he's being able to get these type of wins and develop a new rapport with Sam Darnold after having the rapport that he had with Kirk Cousins. But yeah, this Vikings team, like I said, their defense is looking great too. Forced 3 interceptions out of Jordan Love as well in his return. One from Byron Murphy Jr., from Shaquille Griffin, and from Camus Grugier-Hill. So the team is playing really good football. And they also have people like Stephon Gilmore, Cameron Bynum, who had that iconic Usher celebration in week 3 against the Texans. That defense is for real, guys. And it's just really a testament to how this team is playing. But moving on to Green Bay, it was definitely a rocky game for Jordan Love, but they did have a better second half, like I mentioned. Completed 32 out of his 54 passing attempts. That is a lot in my opinion. That is way too many passing attempts, especially in his first game back. But to each their own. He had 389 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. And of course, those 3 interceptions that I mentioned. But like I said, in the second half, he was able to spread the ball around more. Jaden Reed had 7 receptions for 139 receiving yards and a touchdown. Jatavion Wicks had 5 receptions for 78 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. And Tucker Kraft had 6 receptions for 53 receiving yards and a touchdown. So these teams, they'll certainly be at the top of the NFC North, but also the Lions too. That division is looking tough. Like, we could see 3 teams come out of that division, but also you could say the same thing for the NFC South too. So something's gonna have to give with these teams throughout the season. We're gonna see a couple teams potentially have really good records, but could end up missing the playoffs just because there's only 7 spots, and that's just what it is ultimately. But there's a lot of talent in the NFC. Now I know a lot of people talk about the AFC, and I still think that they're also the more talented conference, but we're seeing that the NFC, they're getting more loaded as well too. So it's a good win for the Vikings, and for the Packers, they'll be good. They were playing really good football with Malik Willis as the backup, but now with Jordan Love being back, I think they're gonna get into their bags some more and make a case to try to win an NFC North. But the Vikings, they're still undefeated, so they're on top of that right now. The Indianapolis Colts were able to get a win over the Pittsburgh Steelers, winning 27-24, forcing the Steelers to their first loss. But for the Steelers, I still don't think that they played a bad game. Their defense played a little uncharacteristic, but offensively, they played a pretty good game. And I will continue to say this: Justin Fields, he is the quarterback of the future for the Steelers, and there's no need to put Russell Wilson in the game unless, God forbid, something happened to Justin Fields. But he's your starter. There's nothing to think about. I know Mike Tomlin won't officially say it, won't officially name him as a starter for the rest of the year, but it is what it is. He is their guy. And if you're a Steelers fan, after being in quarterback purgatory for a few years, after losing Ben Roethlisberger due to retirement in just the latter years of his career, Justin Fields, he's your guy for sure. And he had a really good game, completed 22 out of his 34 passing attempts, had 312 passing yards and a touchdown. And also in the running game, he had 55 rushing yards on 10 carries and 2 touchdowns. I know that there was a snap trouble with him and his center, but he had a really good game. And there's not really anything to think about or overthink about it. He is the quarterback, and that really just says it. George Pickens had a good game, had 7 receptions for 113 receiving yards. Freiermuth had 57 receiving yards. Najee Harris also had 54 receiving yards. And even Cordell Patterson in the running game, he had 43 rushing yards and is 33 years old, but still playing some solid football at his age. So that's good for the Steelers, but they weren't able to get the win. And it's low-key because Joe Flacco came in the game as a backup after Anthony Richardson got injured from a hip injury. But Flacco played a really good game, was able to utilize that underneath game, connecting with players like Josh Downs, who had 8 receptions on 82 receiving yards and a touchdown. Also, Michael Pittman Jr. had 6 receptions for 113 receiving yards. Jonathan Taylor also had 88 rushing yards on 21 carries and a touchdown. And if I didn't mention it already, Joe Flacco completed 16 out of his 26 passing attempts for 168 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. So just a really efficient game, and that's why you go out and get Joe Flacco from the Browns. Arguably the best backup quarterback in the league. Provide some insurance just in case your number 1 guy gets hurt, and he served his purpose in that game for sure. Now it looks like Anthony Richardson's injury isn't as serious as they thought, so we'll see if he plays in week 5. But if not, they have Joe Flacco in the game for sure to be able to be competent and lead this group potentially to another win. So I don't think it's a bad scenario if Anthony Richardson were to miss week 5, because they're still a really good football team even with Flacco at his age at 39. But the Colts team, a lot of people predicted them to lose this game, and that would have had them at a 1-3 record, but it's a good win for them. And for the Steelers, they're still number 1 in the AFC North. We'll see how that goes with Baltimore and the win that they got over Buffalo and how they look. But certainly the Steelers team, they have their quarterback of the future in Justin Fields, and there's nothing to overthink with that. And for the Colts, they're going to be good. With the injuries that the Los Angeles Rams are dealing with, I'm not surprised that they lost this game as they faced the Chicago Bears in Chicago, and Chicago won 24-18. We'll talk a little bit about the Rams first. Not a good performance, but I'm not expecting that with their offensive line being so injured, and also the Rams dealing without weapons like Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. Matthew Stafford completed 20 of his 29 passing attempts, had 224 passing yards and an interception. Kyron Williams had a good game, had 19 carries on 94 rushing yards and a touchdown, but for the team overall, it was just hard for them to get things going offensively and defensively. And when you're missing a lot of your key pieces on the offensive end, I mean, you're not going to play like you expected to be. But Sean McVay, he's not going to make excuses. I will say Tutu Atwell had a solid performance. He had 4 receptions on 82 receiving yards, but it's low-key looking a lot like that 2022 season when the Rams had a lot of injuries and they ended up having a horrible record. And of course, injuries is a big part of the game, because if you don't have your key players, I mean, your team is going to be deficited for sure. So hopefully they're able to get their players back. But we'll talk about the Bears real quick because it's a good one for Caleb Williams. Didn't have a crazy game, but completed 17 out of his 23 passing attempts, had 157 passing yards and a touchdown. DeAndre Swift had a good game, rushed for 16 carries, having 93 rushing yards and a touchdown. DeAndre Swift also had 72 receiving yards too, so he was the leading receiver. So just an overall good game from DeAndre Swift. That's good for him. DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Rome Odunze weren't really utilized well because those three receivers only combined for 51 receiving yards total. That's a little concerning, but hopefully they'll be able to get that figured out because I know Keenan Allen, I believe that was his first game back. So it's a good one for the Bears. In that NFC North too, I think they'll finish last, but that doesn't mean that they'll be bad. But shout out to them for getting that dub. A lot of people are going to have a conversation, of course, with how Jaden Daniels has been playing, saying that he should have been a #1 pick, but we just have to give some quarterbacks time. Caleb Williams, he certainly has a ton of talent. Maybe it's just taking him a little bit longer to get through things, but the Bears are going to be solid for sure in years to come, and hopefully Caleb Williams will be able to adapt, know that he doesn't have to be Superman every play, because I think that's some of the problem right now. But once he gets that, he's going to be good. So if you're a Bears fan, I wouldn't be too concerned about that, and it's a good win for the Bears over the Rams in that game. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers dominated the Philadelphia Eagles, winning 33-16 at home. After beating them in the postseason in the fashion that they did last year, you would have expected the Eagles to have some type of fire, but without their weapons like AJ Brown and Devontae Smith and Lane Johnson, it seems like the Eagles kind of had a built-in excuse to kind of lose this game, but that's not good enough in my opinion. But talking about the Buccaneers, because they got the dub, man, Baker Mayfield continues to look really freaking good. I'm happy for him because a lot of people gave him flack in Cleveland. I think he had a really good 2020 season in Cleveland, and then 2021 they weren't as good and they ended up moving on to Deshaun Watson, and we're seeing in Cleveland right now that team not being as good. A lot of people are frustrated with their play, and even talks about Deshaun Watson being moved. So it's a credit to Baker Mayfield, and even talks about Deshaun Watson being cut at the end of the year. So it's really a testament to Baker Mayfield. Now he was able to bet on himself going to Tampa Bay in 2023, having a really good season, getting that contract this past offseason, and playing good football because he completed 30 out of his 47 passing attempts in this game, had 347 passing yards, 2 touchdowns passing, and also a touchdown rushing. Shout out to Baker, man. I'm happy for him. Bucky Irving and Rashad White, they combined 98 rushing yards. Two really good young backs looking good in the backfield, and also receiving wise, the Bucs receivers had a field day on CJ Gardner-Johnson, who had that trash stuff that he said before the game.
Gonna put belt ass today. Gonna put belt ass today.
Mayfield looking left, throwing left, has him, it's Evans, touchdown, Tampa.
They ended up biting him in the butt. Mike Evans had 8 receptions for 94 receiving yards and a touchdown. Chris Godwin had 6 receptions for 69 receiving yards. Trey Palmer also had a touchdown. Cade Otton had 52 receiving yards. Sterling Shepard had 51 receiving yards. The game was really spread out ultimately. So that Eagles defense, they still look a little soft in my opinion. I don't know what it is because they definitely have the personnel to be good enough, especially under that defensive scheme with Vic Fangio. But for the Eagles, man, it continues to be a problem. I don't think Nick Sirianni is a bad coach at all, but the team, they look like how they did with that fall off at the end of the year last year, and they aren't playing good football at all. Right now, Jalen Hurts, he looks like the 2021 version of Jalen Hurts before he took that leap, and similar to last season at the end, just turning over the ball. We saw Levante David force that fumble at the end of the game, and Hurts only threw for 158 passing yards, a touchdown, only completed 18 out of 30 passing attempts. Just not a good game overall. Like I said, I know that they didn't have people like AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, so that definitely makes a difference, but still, what are you gonna do when your team is tested ultimately? We know Jalen Hurts has a lot of those quotes, and I'm not gonna clown about that, but bro, it just doesn't look good right now. Saquon Barkley, he had that one long rush, and for the game had 10 carries on 84 rushing yards and had 32 receiving yards as well too, but they're definitely facing some adversity right now. Dallas Goedert had a good game too, had 62 receiving yards. Jalen Hurts also had a rushing touchdown, but it just wasn't good enough. It didn't look good at all. As a Cowboys fan, I'm happy about it, but just as a football fan and just being objective about it, they have to lock in because we're a far away from 2022, and we need to stop comparing this Eagles team to 2022. They don't have Shane Steichen, they don't have Jonathan Gannon. Those coordinators are gone and they're now head coaches. So what are the Eagles going to do now? Because like I said, it's not looking good, but the Bucs, they look really good, and like I said before the season, I think that they're still going to win the NFC South for another year. This game right here went exactly how I expected it to. Even with the injuries that the 49ers are dealing with, they still dominated the New England Patriots, winning 30-13. Defense looked really stout and great. Fred Warner had a 54-yard interception return for a touchdown. He ended up getting hurt in the game, hoping he's okay because the 49ers are already dealing with injuries from Christian McCaffrey, some knick-knack injuries with Deebo Samuel and George Kittle dealt with, even though that they both played in the game on Sunday. But But the Niners, they look good. Talking about them first before briefly talking about the Patriots, because like I talked about teams like the Giants and other teams of that nature, we don't expect a lot from them. But for the 49ers, Brock Purdy was low-key dealing with a back injury that was reported this past week, but still was able to play through it. Completed 15 out of his 27 passing attempts, had 288 passing yards, a touchdown, and an interception. But on the ground, even without Christian McCaffrey, Jordan Mason is showing to be a really good back for them and will be a good running back number 2 whenever Christian McCaffrey returns. Like I said, that's a mystery on when that'll exactly be. But Mason, he looks good. Had 24 carries for 123 rushing yards and a touchdown. He's played really good football since week 1 in that Jets game. Juwan Jennings, after having a 3-touchdown performance in the game against the Rams in week 4, he continued to have some really good plays, had 3 receptions for 88 receiving yards. Deebo Samuel had 3 receptions for 58 receiving yards as well. And Brandon Ayuk had 48 receiving yards on only 2 receptions. And George Kittle also had a touchdown for 4 receptions and 45 receiving yards. So this team, when they're healthy, we know that they're arguably the best team in the NFL. For sure have the most talent, but we see they continue to run into the Chiefs and lose. But hey, I'm not gonna hit that low right now, 49ers fans. I'm sorry. But with them, it just comes down to health. Christian McCaffrey, he was the offensive player of the year in the NFL last year for a reason. When you're missing a player like that, your team is for sure gonna be not as talented and not as good. So hopefully he's able to come back healthy and on time. You don't want to rush him back. But it's a good win and a good right game for San Francisco for sure. They are now 2-2, and we'll see how things go, because in the division right now, the Seahawks are leading that division. But it's a good win for them. And for the Patriots, I think that we already knew that this team wasn't going to be the greatest. We know that their defense is still solid though under Gerard Mayo in his first year as a head coach. But there's going to be conversations about putting Drake May in eventually, because we know that Jacoby Brissett all along is a bridge quarterback. But you still shouldn't rush him in, because we see it in situations when you rush a quarterback and he's not ready, it ends up becoming detrimental. I think that Drake May, he should end up coming in later in the season, but still continue to play with Jacoby Brissett, because this team was never going to be a playoff contender, let alone be a Super Bowl contender anyway. So it is what it is. But the biggest takeaway is that the 49ers, they got to know. The Washington Commanders smoked the Arizona Cardinals, winning 42-14. Offensive coordinator for the Commanders, Cliff Kingsbury, was able to get a win over his former team. That was a good sign, and it's really just a story about how the team has been playing with Jaden Daniels at the helm of their quarterback position this year. Completed 26 out of his 30 passing attempts, had 233 passing yards, 1 passing touchdown and interception, and also a rushing touchdown on 47 rushing yards. But beyond the stats, it's crazy. 2 years in a row. While I know it's early right now, the number 2 picks, they look like generational talents. Of course, CJ Stroud being the 2nd pick in the 2023 draft for the Texans. We saw the historic rookie year that he had, and for Jaden Daniels, the 2nd pick of this year's draft, he's having a historic start to his season so far, completing 82% of his passing attempts already in his rookie year in his first 4 games. Also, the Commanders have scored on 16 straight possessions in these past couple of games. Their offense looks really explosive, and as a Cowboys fan, I am nervous a little bit, but we'll see how long that continues, because I've been watching this Washington team for a while, and sometimes they get in their way, but it does seem like they have new life for sure. But Jaden Daniels looks like to be a franchise cornerstone for sure for them. Dan Quinn, we've seen what he can do as a head coach. He led the Falcons to the Super Bowl. I know we clowned him about how they lost that 28-3 lead, but he still got that team there, and they have a really good team with a lot of weapons offensively and defensively. Offensively, Brian Robinson Jr., he had 21 carries for 101 rushing yards and a touchdown. Even McNichols too had fun in action. He had 68 rushing yards on 2 touchdowns. Receiving wise, Jaden Daniels was able to get a lot of people involved. Alamade Zacchaeus, hopefully I'm saying his name right, he has 6 receptions on 85 receiving yards. Terry McLaurin had a really good game against the Bengals, and also had a solid game in this game against the Cardinals. Had 7 receptions for 52 receiving yards and a touchdown. Even a player like Noah Brown is able to get involved some. So there's just a lot of good things to take away if you're a Commanders fan. Right now, you're number 1 in the NFC East. As a Cowboys fan right now, I'm saying we'll see what happens in a few weeks. But as an objective football analyst and a future sports reporter, I'm saying shout out to the Commanders, because they look really good right now, and it's a good sign for them. For the Cardinals, I've talked about them previous weeks. I don't think that they'll be a playoff team, but I definitely don't think that they'll suck. They're 1-3 right now. They definitely have to get things right for sure, because Kyler Murray didn't look great in this game. Only had 142 passing yards, completed 16 out of his 22 passing attempts for a touchdown, but there's not really a reason to get into the stats too much. James Conner did have a good game, I will say. Had 104 rushing yards on 18 carries and a touchdown. But for them, they need to get Marvin Harrison Jr. involved way more. He had 5 receptions for 45 receiving yards and a touchdown too. But bro, he is your future. He is your wide receiver number 1. Get Marvin the ball. He will get it somehow. But I think it's more so a testament to how the Commanders are playing and how hot they are. So it's a good win for them. All right, guys, I'm not gonna lie, the video is getting a little long, so I'm gonna speed through the remaining games. And these videos are longer, especially these recaps, because I want to get into every team. I don't want to have a lazy analysis, but for time reasons, we're gonna go on and get through these final ones. So talking about the Chiefs and the Chargers game, the Chargers, y'all had this game in the first half, but we all know the game is a full 60 minutes. It's not just 2 quarters, and they ended up biting you in the butts. Patrick Mahomes by no means had the greatest game of his career, but the best players make the biggest plays when it matters most. We did see Rashee Rice leave the game with a knee injury, and at first I thought it was probably going to be a torn ACL out for the season, but as the days have followed and it now being Tuesday, there's still been no significant injury listed. Obviously, he's going to miss some time, could potentially even be on IR, but that's good good news if you're a Chiefs fan if he isn't out for the season, because he has emerged as the #1 receiver for the Chiefs. And honestly, talking about statistics, I don't think we really need to get into that. Mahomes threw for 254 passing yards, had a touchdown, interception, things of that nature. And interception, that's when that Rashee Rice injury occurred. But it's a good win for them, 17-10. They're now 4-0. The Chargers, they are better than a lot of people expected. Obviously, you have Harbaugh bringing a new identity and a physical type of game for that football team. Justin Herbert being there in his 5th year, that team is going to be solid. I can see them potentially winning 7 to 9 games. Maybe. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs, but in 2025, I do think they'll make the playoffs. It was a good game for sure. Moving into the next game, the Browns and the Raiders, we're going to spend like less than 45 seconds on this game. Not going to lie, guys. The Raiders won 20-16. This is really the intriguing conversation if we're talking about the Raiders real quick from their perspective. Devontae Adams. There's been a lot of trade rumors saying that he's potentially played his last game as Las Vegas Raider. Antonio Pierce liking a post on Instagram that basically insinuated the same thing. That's suspect. As a Cowboy fan, I would want the Cowboys to trade for him, but obviously old man Jerry's not going to do anything, so come on. But anyways, it'll be interesting to see if he does get traded where he would potentially line up, because that's a game changer right there for sure. But the Raiders still won the game. For the Browns though, I wouldn't be surprised at the end of the season if they end up cutting Deshaun Watson. That'll be a huge salary cap hit. I'm not going to roast him for making a trade because there were other teams interested in Deshaun Watson at the time in 2022, but it has not worked out great. He is not the same player that he was in Houston. I don't know what it is psychologically or whatever, but it's just not looking good for Cleveland. So that's what it is. And then for the last game that took place on Sunday, matchup between the Bills and the Ravens, I'm not gonna lie, I was looking forward to this game. Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, a potential future playoff matchup that we could see. And man, it was low-key a stinker. The Ravens, they dominated and they showed why they should still be viewed as one of the best teams in the AFC and a Super Bowl contender. When that 85-yard rushing touchdown by Derrick Henry occurred, I already knew what time it was. They were starting to get hot. And I really think that Todd Monken offense is starting to identify how to use Derrick Henry adequately. He also had his first receiving touchdown since 2019. That's a crazy stat, but played a great game offensively and defensively. The Bills suffered their first loss of the season. I still think they'll be okay, but it's a wake-up call and probably humble them. But I like seeing the Ravens get their groove back. I didn't like that they beat the Cowboys, obviously, but everyone was overreacting to the first 2 games. They're the team that we thought they would be, and they're gonna be one of the best teams in the league, period. Yeah, that basically sums up the games for Monday night. Not gonna spend too much time on the Titans and Dolphins game. It sucks though because the Dolphins had so many expectations trying to get things right for this season. Then Tua suffered a concussion in week 2, but it does look like he's gonna come back. Like I told you on previous videos, he's not gonna retire right now. He's worked his whole life to get into the NFL, just got a new contract. He's not retiring, so that's the end of the discussion with that. Tyler Huntley played in the game, and no disrespect to him, but it kind of went how we expected it to. Dolphins weren't able to really do anything. They lost the game 31-12 to the Titans, who are not good at all. But I will say, Will Levis keeps giving us these meme opportunities. It's very funny, but realistically talking about the Titans, I do think they need to draft a quarterback next year. Will Levis, he's talented, but I can tell Brian Callahan is already fed up with him after 4 weeks, so that's the thing. He ended up getting hurt in the game, and Mason Rudolph played, and they ended up winning the game. But yeah, I mean, there's not too much to talk about from that game. And then talking about the Seahawks and Lions, that was the game to talk about. Oh my gosh, a back and forth game. The Lions, they look scary. They look like low-key they have the best offense in the NFL right now after the first 4 weeks. Jared Goff had a perfect game, completed all 18 out of his 18 passing attempts, had 292 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. And also Jared Goff had a receiving touchdown too, so that was crazy. He has more touchdowns receiving than a lot of key skill players in the league, like Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Jalen Waddle, a lot of different players, but I'm not roasting them. That's just a crazy stat low-key thrown by Amon-Ra St. Brown. But if you're a fan of teams that run the ball, it was a beautiful thing to see from the Lions perspective and for the Seahawks, because between Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, they combined for 3 touchdowns and 118 rushing yards. For the Seahawks, Kenneth Walker played a really good game, had 80 rushing yards on 12 carries for 3 touchdowns, did wonders for me in fantasy, shout out to him. But it was a really good game. The Seahawks, they suffered their first loss, but right now, I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't be surprised if they won the NFC West. All of the injuries that the 49ers have right now, same with the Rams and the Cardinals, they're good, but I don't think that they're gonna be playoff contenders. The Seahawks, they look really good. This was their first loss. They didn't lose by too much either. I mean, you can make the argument that first DK Metcalf, when they went for the 2-point conversion, they caught it, but there was a penalty, but they ruled it out. But he really did catch that in bounds. If they would have had those extra 2 points, they could have had some momentum. Things could have looked differently, but the Lions, they look like they're one of the best teams in the NFC, if not the best, but they still have the Vikings in their division. That's a conversation to be had there. But the Seahawks, there's no shame in losing that game because they were losing 4 defensive starters and still had the game relatively close. The final score was 42-29, so it's not like they were blown out. It was a high-scoring game, so that was a good matchup for sure. I liked watching that game. It was a good cat to NFL Week 4, and I enjoyed it. But yeah, guys, let me know what y'all think in the comments down below about NFL Week 4. As the weeks progress, and probably like around week 7 or 8, I'll make my top 5 teams in the league at that time, because like I said, I don't like to react to the first few weeks of the season, but as you get into the latter weeks, then you'll start to have an identity. Some of the teams that'll separate, some of the teams that are going to be tanking, having a Shadur, Travis Hunter, Jalen Milroe sweepstakes probably for the 2025 draft. But it's a beautiful time. The NFL season is shaping up to be good. We're in October now, thank God. Fall time, football weather soon, even though I live in Texas, so it's really mostly hot always. We have our cold sometimes too, but it's a beautiful time, and let me know what y'all thought from NFL Week 4. I appreciate y'all guys watching. Always make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on post notifications. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at SwaggyRuss, and also on TikTok at SwaggyRuss02 for cooking videos, shorts, reels, things of that nature. More videos are on the way always. Stay tuned for these recaps and more videos. The NBA season is starting soon in October. Gonna be a lot of content on the NBA. Y'all know that's my favorite sport for sure, but I know football and I love football as well too, but football's second compared to the NBA for me. But yeah, y'all stay tuned for that. God loves you, you're important, Jesus loves you. Hope y'all have a good one, be blessed, and keep being great.